So you think the jaguar is the king of the Amazon, right? Or maybe the green anaconda, that 30-foot noodle of muscle that squeezes capybaras into juice boxes. Fair guesses. But here's the thing. Both of those modern predators would have been appetizers for a prehistoric monster you've probably never even heard of. Roughly 8 million years ago, the Amazon wasn't the tangled rainforest we know today. It was more like one giant swamp system, and in that swamp lived a reptile so absurdly oversized it makes today's crocodiles look like handbag models. We're talking about Purussaurus brasiliensis, a caiman that could grow over 40 feet long. Picture a living log the size of a school bus, armed with a bite force that makes T-Rex look like it had jaw problems. Yeah, this was not the guy you wanted to bump into while getting a drink of water. And the wild part. Fossils suggest this wasn't some lonely freak accident of evolution. Nope. The Miocene Amazon was crawling with these things, casually swallowing giant turtles, sloths, and anything else dumb enough to get too close. The jaguar, the anaconda, the caiman, all the things you think of as apex predators today, they wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes. So buckle up, because we're about to drag you into the Miocene swamp and introduce you to the largest predator the Amazon has ever seen. And trust me, it makes a jaguar look like a house cat. When people picture the Amazon today, it's basically a highlight reel of things that could ruin your vacation. Jaguars prowling the riverbanks, stealthy caimans lurking with just their eyes above the water, and snakes so large they can wrap you up like leftover burritos. Pretty intimidating lineup, right? Well, here's the plot twist. This is the downgraded version. The Miocene Amazon about 8 million years ago was the Amazon on steroids. First off, the landscape was totally different. Forget dense jungle canopies and toucans screaming from the trees. Much of what we now call the Amazon was a massive wetland system known as the Pebas megawetland. Imagine the Everglades, but stretched across half a continent. We're talking thousands of interconnected lakes, swamps, and flooded forests. Perfect real estate for oversized reptiles that basically said, "Thanks, evolution, I'll take it from here." And this swamp wasn't just home to normal-sized animals. Oh no, the Miocene was like a prehistoric version of an amusement park where all the rides are broken and trying to eat you. There were rodents the size of cows casually chewing plants, turtles with shells bigger than dining tables, and giant sloths lumbering around like the world's most unfortunate marshmallows. Basically, if you were alive here, you were either massive or on the menu, sometimes both. Now in today's Amazon, the jaguar reigns supreme. It's a powerful predator, no doubt, with a skull-crushing bite that makes short work of capybaras and caimans. But in the Miocene, a jaguar would have been a glorified snack, like tossing a chicken wing into a crocodile enclosure. Because lurking beneath the swampy waters was an apex predator so over the top that even Hollywood hasn't made it a monster movie villain yet. This is where Purussaurus enters the story. Before we meet him officially, let's just acknowledge how unfair nature can be. While most animals evolved to be faster, smarter, or sneakier, this thing evolved with the philosophy of bigger is always better. It didn't need stealth when it could simply sit there like a living log the size of a school bus, waiting for something unlucky to wander too close. Imagine you're a capybara back then. You lean down for a sip of swamp water thinking life's not so bad. Then suddenly the water explodes and you're in the jaws of a reptile that could crush bones like potato chips. Yeah, not ideal. And that's the beauty and horror of the Miocene Amazon. It was an ecosystem built for giants, where the food chain wasn't just a ladder but a sheer cliff. Every creature had to deal with the fact that at the top sat a predator no one could challenge. Today's Amazon feels dangerous enough, but back then? Let's just say if you think the mosquitoes are bad now, try adding a reptile that could literally eat a small car. So while modern explorers get nervous about jaguars in the underbrush, ancient creatures had way bigger problems. Because when Purussaurus was around, you didn't need to worry about what was hiding in the trees. You had to worry about the water itself. All right, let's finally meet the main character of this prehistoric horror story, Purussaurus brasiliensis. If you're imagining a slightly oversized crocodile, go ahead and stop. This wasn't just a croc, it was the Amazon's equivalent of a freight train with teeth. For starters, Purussaurus stretched up to 12 meters long. That's about 40 feet. In modern terms, we're talking the length of a school bus parked in the water, except instead of carrying kids and lunchboxes, it carried a skull bigger than your dining room table. Seriously, its skull alone measured nearly 1.5 meters long, and when you're rocking a head that size, you don't just nibble on fish, you pretty much audition for the role of swamp god. Now, size is one thing, but let's talk bite force. Estimates put Purussaurus at around 15,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. For comparison, a modern saltwater crocodile, no slouch in the chomping department, clocks in at about 3,700 psi. Even Tyrannosaurus rex, the poster child for prehistoric bite strength, lands somewhere around 8,000. So yes, Purussaurus could literally out-chomp T-Rex. That's not hyperbole, that's fossil math. If you were unfortunate enough to end up in those jaws, your skeleton would be filing for divorce from your muscles before you even knew what hit you. As for lifestyle, Purussaurus wasn't running marathons. This was a classic ambush predator. Picture it. A living log drifting silently near the water's edge, nostrils barely breaking the surface. Then some Miocene mammal, say a giant capybara the size of a bison, wanders down for a drink. One second it's sipping water, the next it's being dragged under by a set of jaws that could crack its ribs like pistachios. Cue the prehistoric death roll, and that's game over. Dinner served. And because it lived in the Pebas mega wetland, Purussaurus had an all-you-can-eat buffet. Giant turtles with shells the size of satellite dishes. Check-ground sloths who thought their bulk made them safe. Sorry, try again. Herds of oversized rodents. Basically the Purussaurus lunch special. If it fit in its mouth, it was fair game. And when your mouth is basically a cave with teeth, that includes a lot. Fossil evidence even suggests Purussaurus didn't just stick to little snacks. Some paleontologists think it might have gone after early whales and tapir-like mammals that ventured too close to the water. In other words, it wasn't picky. This was less specialized hunter and more garbage disposal with scales. Now, before you start thinking this monster was just a one-off freak of nature, it's worth noting that crocodilians are basically survival experts. They've been around for over 200 million years, outliving dinosaurs, ice ages, and whatever else the planet threw at them. But Purussaurus was their Amazonian crown jewel, their evolutionary high score, big, scary, and perfectly suited for its swampy kingdom. So yeah, when we talk about the largest predator in the Amazon, we're not exaggerating. Jaguars, cute. Anacondas, impressive noodles. But Purussaurus? That thing was a prehistoric nightmare with scales, and it absolutely owned its environment. Alright, so now that we've met Purussaurus, let's open up the prehistoric buffet menu and see what was on offer. Spoiler, if you lived in Miocene South America and were larger than a loaf of bread, you probably had a chance encounter with this reptilian nightmare. And by chance encounter, I mean you got chomped, rolled, and turned into swamp leftovers. First up, the most obvious entree, giant rodents. Today's capybaras already look like oversized guinea pigs, but back in the Miocene, things got weird. We're talking about Neocorus and other relatives, rodents the size of modern cows. Imagine a hamster that could mow your lawn and then sit on your car. To Purussaurus, these giant furballs were walking cheeseburgers. One snap of its jaws and boom, rodent problem solved. But rodents weren't the only thing unlucky enough to be on the menu. Enter Stupendomes, the absolute unit of turtles. This freshwater tank stretched over 3 meters long, with a shell so wide it could double as a dining table. Now you'd think a shell that size would make you invincible, not against Purussaurus. Fossil evidence shows turtle shells with deep bite marks, some crushed entirely. That's like biting through a Kevlar shield just to get at the chewy middle. How rude. And then there were the ground sloths. Forget the sleepy tree huggers we picture today. Miocene sloths were bulked up herbivores the size of small cars, lumbering across the wetlands with all the speed of, well, a sloth. They were basically giant, slow-moving marshmallows, perfect targets. Fossilized sloth bones found near Purussaurus sites suggest that yes, sometimes the swamp god decided sloth was on the menu. Imagine minding your own business, chewing some leaves, when suddenly the ground explodes and you're in the prehistoric equivalent of a NutriBullet. But wait, it gets better. Some paleontologists think Purussaurus may have even dined on early cetaceans, small river-dwelling whales, and dolphins. That's right, whales. When you're 40 feet long yourself, you don't discriminate between land snacks and aquatic entrees. If it swam by and you could catch it, dinner was served. So yeah, bad day to be a dolphin. The feeding style was brutal. Ambush from below, slam the jaws shut, and let physics do the rest. Bones would crack, shells would shatter, and anything still alive got treated to the infamous crocodilian death roll. Picture a reptile the size of a bus grabbing you and then spinning like a malfunctioning washing machine. That's not a fight you walk away from, it's more like a violent blender. And the best part? This wasn't a sometimes hunter, sometimes scavenger situation. Purussaurus was a full-time apex predator. Fossil sites littered with crushed turtle shells and broken bones tell us it wasn't shy about leaving evidence behind. If the Amazon back then had a crime scene investigation team, their report would have been short. Cause of death, Purussaurus happened. In short, the Miocene Amazon was less about the survival of the fittest and more about the survival of the fastest, or the luckiest. Because when a reptile with the strongest bite force in history ruled your ecosystem, there wasn't really much negotiating. You were either big enough to be a meal or small enough to avoid detection. Everyone else? Welcome to the menu. Now you might be thinking, surely Purussaurus wasn't the only nightmare wandering around the Miocene Amazon? And you'd be right. South America during this time was basically nature's version of a monster mash, with predators competing for snacks like oversized rodents and sloths. But here's the kicker. Even with the competition, Purussaurus sat at the top like a scaly mob boss who didn't take kindly to rivals. Let's start with the so-called terror birds, the Purussaurus. Imagine a 10-foot-tall ostrich with a hooked beak sharp enough to puncture bone. These were land-based predators that hunted with speed and precision. If you were a smaller mammal, getting smacked by a terror bird was like being hit with a feathery sledgehammer. Impressive, right? But against Purussaurus, not a chance. A bird that big still had to drink water at some point. And if it chose the wrong watering hole, it'd get snatched like a rubber chicken at a carnival. Then there were the saber-toothed marsupials, like Thelacos milis. Think of them as South America's knockoff saber-toothed cats, with oversized canines designed to puncture throats. They were terrifying in their own right, prowling the drier areas of the continent. But they still had the same problem as the terror birds. Purussaurus didn't care about your fancy teeth if you got too close to the water. Bite force beats cosplay Smilodon every time. And we can't forget the snakes. The Miocene hosted some serious contenders, including early giant anacondas. Today's green anaconda can grow nearly 30 feet long and swallow deer whole, so imagine a slightly bigger version slithering through those wetlands. Sounds terrifying, but here's the reality. Snakes strangle, Purussaurus crushes. If the two ever had a prehistoric showdown, the odds favored the reptilian bus with teeth. The snake might get one good wrap around the body, but with 15,000 psi of jaw power, one bite and the fight's over. So why did Purussaurus come out on top? Simple: size, strength, and location. The Pebus mega wetland was essentially its playground. While terror birds ruled the dry land and marsupial predators stalked the forests, Purussaurus owned the rivers, lakes, and swamps. And in an ecosystem where everything had to drink or cross water at some point, that gave it the ultimate tactical advantage. Ambush predators don't have to be fast or clever when literally everyone has to step into their office sooner or later. The fossil record backs this up. Sites in Brazil, Peru, and Colombia reveal a whole cast of Miocene creatures: rodents, turtles, sloths, birds, all preserved alongside evidence of massive crocodilians. It paints a picture of an ecosystem where danger came from every direction, but while other predators played their niche roles, Purussaurus was the one thing nobody could ignore. It wasn't just another killer, it was the killer. So yeah, imagine living in that world. You've got terror birds chasing you across the plains, saber-toothed marsupials eyeing you from the trees, giant snakes waiting in the grass, and then, just when you think you've found safety at the water's edge, you're swallowed by a reptile the size of a bus. The Miocene wasn't survival of the fittest, it was survival of whoever didn't run into Purussaurus. Alright, so we've established that Purussaurus was basically the final boss of the Miocene Amazon, but here's the fun part. How do we even know this beast existed? After all, swamps aren't exactly known for preserving fossils. Fast forward a few million years and most of that wetland has either eroded away or been swallowed by jungle. So, finding evidence of a reptile the size of a bus, that's like trying to find a paperclip in a hurricane. The story starts in the late 19th century when explorers and paleontologists began poking around the Amazon basin. Imagine trudging through dense rainforest, dealing with mosquitoes the size of helicopters, and then tripping over a massive chunk of bone sticking out of a riverbank. That's how some of the first Purussaurus fossils came to light, completely by accident. Early reports described skull fragments and jawbones so enormous that locals sometimes mistook them for rocks. You know, casual boulders shaped like jaws with teeth the size of bananas. Over the decades, more pieces of the puzzle turned up across Brazil, Peru, and Colombia. The most famous discoveries include jawbones over 1.5 meters long, loaded with conical teeth built for puncturing and crushing. From these fragments, paleontologists started reconstructing the animal, comparing it to modern crocodilians. The results were ridiculous. A caiman scaled up to nightmare proportions. Now let's talk about the skull. The fossils show a head so massive it makes even the largest living crocodile look like it's playing dress-up. The bones are thick, the snout broad, and the attachment sites for jaw muscles. Huge. That's how scientists calculated the absurd bite force, by basically running the numbers on muscle size and leverage. The math all came back to the same conclusion. If Purussaurus bit down on something, it wasn't getting back up. The fossil trail also revealed clues about the environment. Many remains were found near deposits full of turtle shells, fish bones, and mammal fossils. It's like Purussaurus left behind an accidental scrapbook of its diet. One particularly telling discovery included turtle shells with massive puncture marks that match the spacing of Purussaurus teeth. That's the paleontological equivalent of fingerprints at a crime scene. Case closed. This thing really did crush turtles for breakfast. But it wasn't easy work. The Amazon isn't exactly a friendly place for fossil digs. Rivers constantly shift, floods bury sites, and vegetation hides everything. Add in the fact that fossil bones are heavy and fragile, and you start to see why some of these discoveries took decades to properly study. In fact, some early finds sat in museum collections gathering dust until modern paleontologists re-examined them with better techniques. Turns out that random big skull in the back room? Yeah, that was evidence of the Amazon's greatest predator. And even today, new finds keep turning up. Riverbanks and eroded cliffs occasionally expose fresh pieces of the puzzle, reminding us that much of the Miocene Amazon is still buried. Who knows how many more Purussaurus skulls or skeletons are waiting to be uncovered? Paleontologists often joke that the Amazon still holds more secrets than it has revealed, and considering how little of the region has been excavated, they're not wrong. So next time you think about fossils as clean, dusty bones in a museum, remember that the reality is far messier. Finding Purussaurus was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle in the dark, with most of the pieces missing, and the box cover shredded. And yet, piece by piece, paleontologists brought this monster back to life. Not literally, thankfully, or we'd all be rethinking our beach vacations. So here's the million-dollar question. If Purussaurus was so unstoppable, why isn't it still cruising around the Amazon, casually reminding jaguars who's boss? The short answer, nature has a way of humbling even its most overpowered creations. Let's rewind about 5 to 6 million years ago toward the end of the Miocene. The Amazon basin was undergoing some serious renovations. Tectonic activity was reshaping the continent, the Andes Mountains were rising higher, and the Pebas megawetland, the swampy paradise that Purussaurus called home, started to dry up. Rivers shifted, habitats shrank, and those sprawling swamp systems fragmented into smaller ecosystems. For a predator that relied on vast, shallow wetlands, this was not ideal. And then there's the prey problem. When you're a 40-foot reptile with a bite designed to crunch through armored turtles and giant sloths, you need a steady supply of supersized meals. But as the environment changed, a lot of those mega creatures started disappearing too. Giant rodents dwindled, Stupendemys turtles became rarer, and many of the herbivorous heavyweights either went extinct or migrated elsewhere. Suddenly, the buffet turned into a snack bar. Not exactly enough to keep a school bus-sized caiman fed. Add to that the competition factor. Smaller, more adaptable crocodilians began to thrive as the wetlands shrank. They didn't need massive prey or sprawling swamps. They could survive on fish, small mammals, and just about anything else. While Purussaurus was built for crushing giants, its smaller cousins were built for flexibility. Evolution tends to reward adaptable over terrifying. So while the little guys flourished, the big guys starved. It's also worth noting that being enormous is a double-edged sword. Sure, it makes you the apex predator, but it also makes you vulnerable to even slight environmental changes. A few droughts, a drop in prey populations, or reduced breeding grounds, and suddenly your entire species is in trouble. Think of it like trying to maintain a monster truck when the gas station runs out of fuel. Doesn't matter how powerful it is. Without resources, it's just a giant lawn ornament. By the time the Miocene ended and the Pliocene began, Purussaurus had disappeared. No dramatic meteor strike, no Hollywood-style extinction event, just a slow decline as the world around it shifted. In a sense, it was less about being defeated and more about being left behind by evolution. Its specialized lifestyle couldn't keep up with the changing Amazon, and eventually the biggest predator the region had ever seen faded into history. So yeah, Purussaurus didn't go out in a blaze of glory. It wasn't slain by rival predators or wiped out by disease. It simply grew too big for a world that was shrinking. And that's the ultimate irony. The very thing that made it a legend, its sheer size, was the same thing that guaranteed its extinction. Even though Purussaurus has been gone for about 5 to 6 million years, its shadow still looms over the Amazon, and honestly, it deserves that legendary status. Because when you look at modern crocodilians, your caimans, your crocs, your gators, you're staring at the scrappy survivors of a dynasty that once produced a reptile so over the top that even T-Rex would have had second thoughts about swimming lessons in South America. Today's black caiman is the largest predator in the Amazon, topping out at around 5 meters long. Impressive, sure, but that's still less than half the size of Purussaurus. It's like comparing a bulldog to a grizzly bear. Both can mess you up, but one clearly wins in a who-could-eat-the-other contest. Still, scientists see modern caimans as direct reminders of their oversized cousin. Same body plan, same ambush tactics, just scaled way down so they don't run out of groceries. The legacy of Purussaurus also tells us a lot about ancient ecosystems. Its very existence proves that the Miocene Amazon was capable of supporting absolute giants. To feed a predator that big, you need prey that's equally massive and an environment stable enough to keep the food chain stacked. In other words, if you saw a Purussaurus, you were also looking at a world where cow-sized rodents and car-sized turtles were just part of the background scenery. It also reshapes how we view apex predators today. We like to think of jaguars as untouchable rulers of the Amazon, the ultimate killers of their domain, and in modern times, they are. But stack one up against Purussaurus, the jaguar is basically a snack-sized Kit Kat bar. That's not an insult. It's just reality when you're standing next to something that could swallow you whole and still have room for dessert. So yeah, bad day to be a jaguar. And while Purussaurus may be extinct, its family isn't going anywhere. Crocodilians are some of the toughest survivors in Earth's history. They've shrugged off asteroid impacts, ice ages, and entire continental shifts. Purussaurus might have been too specialized to make the cut, but its smaller relatives carried the torch, and they're still out there today, lurking in rivers and reminding us that evolution doesn't play favorites. There's also a more humbling takeaway. Extinction doesn't care how strong, fast, or terrifying you are. Being the apex predator only works as long as the environment stays in your favor. Once it changes, even the king of the swamp can be dethroned. That's a lesson written in fossilized jaws and shattered turtle shells. So next time you hear about jaguars prowling the forest or anacondas slipping through Amazon rivers, just remember, those are the lightweights. The Amazon once had a predator so massive, so absurdly powerful, that it makes modern killers look like background extras. Purussaurus wasn't just the largest predator in the Amazon, it was the kind of creature that rewrote the rules of what apex meant. And honestly, the only reason we don't talk about it more is because none of us would have survived long enough to tell the story if it were still around.